Heyo everybody, Haku here with another One Piece discussion since we're on another break week. Lately, every time we've been having a week off from One Piece, I've been doing these discussions just to throw out some topics that I've been wanting to talk about, but I don't want to make them into one video each and just post a bunch of smaller videos. So it's just going to be big general One Piece discussion. We are at chapter 1028, so for those of you watching in the future to know where I'm at, as of the time I'm having these thoughts. This video is going to be no different. I have 7 topics to talk about. Most of them probably aren't going to be that long, though I do have like a full page of notes that I took. But other than that, the 7 topics are going to be Carrot's mysterious floating ability that hasn't been explained yet, discussion about Sunny's sails that I haven't seen brought up, Luffy's nicknaming scheme for people, the theory that Big Mom's siblings could be CP0, the theory that Momonosuke might look like Kaido, which I actually think I think that would be a really cool twist. A thought that I've had about common ancestors in the One Piece world that, again, I haven't seen people talking about that might turn into something in the future. I think that'd be interesting. And lastly, a discussion of Wano so far, just the arc in general, mostly focusing on criticisms, inspired by a recent stream that Nia D. Hemmings did where he talked about Wano, mostly criticisms, I think. So, yeah, I have sort of my own thoughts that I wanted to put out there too. So I was like, you know what, throw it in the discussion video, because there's not really much. I thought about doing like a double review of the past 2 chapters, but I was like, there's not that much to review. It was just a, one focusing on the Zoro fight, kind of getting started, one focusing on the Sanji fight, kind of just getting started. Both were good. I think last chapter, the Sanji fight stuff was better. But either way, I do have a few panels, like, for some of these topics that I'm going to bring up that I'll probably throw up on screen, but sadly I can't keep them up the whole time or anything because of the way One Piece publishers are so crazy with copyright stuff. But yeah, let's get on to the first topic really quickly, and that's just Carrot's floating ability. So when Carrot is first introduced, she catches Zoro off guard by doing what Zoro thinks to himself as floating. Later on, we have one panel in Chocolate Town that a bunch of people have brought up as evidence for Carrot floating again. I think it's just Carrot jumping over a wall in the background, but it could be Carrot just randomly floating again. In the anime, I don't think this was in the manga, but I know for sure, at least in the anime, during the Pedro and Carrot flashbacks, when Pedro's talking about Carrot learning to fight in her own way, he says, you have your Electro and you have the ability to float for quite some time now, and so you can use that to make your own way to fight. So again, it's mentioned there. I think that might be anime only though. And then again, when Carrot uses Sulong back in Whole Cake Island, she once again flies or glides across the water. And yeah, it's never been fully explained. It's just another questionable thing. We haven't seen any other minks do it so far, and my theory on it is that it's going to be an advanced application of Electro, because again, when we first got into the Zoe arc, I thought this was explicitly explained, but maybe it wasn't. But I always thought that Electro was because the minks have fur, so they can sort of harness the static electricity produced by their fur in order to use the electrical attacks. That was what I had assumed Electro was all this time. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it is some innate power. Maybe it's something like Lunarians have this innate fire power for some reason. Maybe minks have this innate electrical power. We know with Fishman Karate, fishmen can control water, but again, I feel like that's just because they grew up in water. But yeah, some of the pressurized water stuff, maybe that technique doesn't make sense unless you say it's like an innate elemental thing, but I doubt that. I think it's just static electricity produced by their fur and stuff like that. And we've seen that Carrot uses Electro more than most of the other minks we've seen. When we see Ino Arashi and Nekomamushi fight, they're usually using like weapon or swordsmanship based skills. They use Electro a little bit, but not to the degree that we see Carrot. Even when Pedro was fighting, we don't see it to the degree that we see with Carrot. Carrot uses Electro a lot, basically constantly while fighting, and even does sort of semi-ranged attacks like the Electrical Luna. So again, I think it could make sense if Carrot uses the static electricity to float in the air. It's like one of those things, I don't remember, like, if, or I don't know if any of you remember having, like, the experiments or anything back in, like, grade school and stuff, where, like, if you rub a comb or something, you can make, like, little scraps of paper float, or you can make a balloon float using static electricity, and there's even, like, larger applications of that. So that's my prediction for how it works. I think it's going to be, because Electro works via static electricity, I think that Carrot can use that static electricity to float. And again, we know it's something that isn't usual because Zoro comments on it, Pedro comments on it, and we haven't seen any other minks doing it. So it seems to be a special, different thing. That or Carrot has some sort of floating devil fruit, which would be kind of similar to Shiki's, I suppose. But I doubt that. I doubt that. So that's my prediction for that sort of unexplained ability. The second thing is Sunny's sails. So I had mentioned to bring, or I had wanted to mention this, I had wanted to bring this up. Both times I talked about Bellamy as a potential character that could return and become Straw Hat for a ton of different reasons. Look at my last few One Piece discussions if you want more discussion on Bellamy. I don't want to talk about him for forever, but I think that there's a lot of things that point toward Bellamy coming back probably when the Straw Hats go up against Blackbeard and ending up joining the crew, or maybe just helping out. We know that he has Luffy's Viva card, so he's likely coming back at some point in general. But here's the thing. The last time we saw the Sunny going to Onigashima, Sunny's sails were still really pretty messed up. They still had a bunch of holes and like some like shoddy like patchwork on them, which is pretty interesting to bring up because we know that Frankie has atom wood and he stored a bunch of it on the ship so that the ship could be repaired using the atom wood. But we don't know if he has any sort of special sail material. The sails are still pretty messed up, even though the ship itself has been patched up after the events of Whole Cake. Even though Frankie's fixed Sunny up, the sails aren't fully fixed up, and we know that Bellamy is at this place that has like unbreakable fabric or whatever, so Bellamy showing up, even if he doesn't join the Straw Hats or anything, that's not what I'm bringing up here, we could see Bellamy coming back into the story to give them or make them unbreakable sails to go on the Sunny. That's just one other small thing that I had been wanting to bring up for a while, but I keep forgetting. The next thing up is Luffy nicknaming characters. So it's interesting, Oda brought up in like an SBS that unless they join the crew or something, Luffy doesn't really remember most people's names because he doesn't think it's that important. So I thought it worth bringing up the weird and interesting characters that Luffy doesn't give nicknames to. So he doesn't give nicknames out of respect to Rayleigh and the Yonko because they're like powerful pirates or whatever, but also arc villains. And arc villains are kind of a questionable thing. I think it's usually just when he's about to take them out, he might use their actual real name once, like is which one's Arlong, are you Hody, when he has to punch Bellamy for the second time, and that's the only time when he says Doflamingo instead of just Mingo. So, like, once when he's going to take them out, he'll, like, use the actual real names for the arc villains. So I just kind of threw those into one grouping because they're, like, sort of powerful enemies plus Rayleigh, who is sort of out of respect. But the Yonko are basically going to be, except for Shanks, arc villains anyway. The second group that he doesn't give nicknames to, obviously Ace and Sabo, his brothers. The third group, another interesting one, Pedro and Kinemon, who I think might fit in as like allies who sacrifice themselves. Luffy doesn't give Pedro a nickname, he always calls him by Pedro, and at first, while he calls Kinemon just Samurai or whatever, he eventually starts calling him Kin or Kinemon, and if Kinemon truly is dead, which is really up in the air, then Pedro and Kinemon could fit the same thing of being sort of like traveling companions who sacrifice themselves. The next grouping is Vivi and Rebecca, who were both characters that have a really close relationship to Luffy. Maybe they'll come back into the story later, who knows. But I guess you could just say the princess character. Of course, he doesn't call Yamato by Yamato. He doesn't call Shirahoshi, but he uses Yowahoshi. He doesn't call Momonosuke Momonosuke, but he calls him Momo. So those two are questionable, so maybe princess characters. The next is the Straw Hats. Obviously, if they're Straw Hats, he starts using their real name. And lastly, the whole point of bringing this up, because the rest fall into groups. It's like the princess characters, the arc villain / Yonko, his family, his Straw Hats. Like, the rest make sense. It's like, okay, yeah, he would remember their names instead of just giving them nicknames, because they're all really centrally important and not just random characters. But the next three are a little bit weird. He never calls Carrot by a nickname. He always calls Carrot Carrot. It could be because Carrot falls into the same place as Vivi or Kinemon, or it's a traveling companion. He calls Bellamy by Bellamy and calls Bellamy his friend. Again, an interesting one, because he doesn't have, other than like the princess characters, he doesn't have other random characters that he just says, oh yeah, they're my friend, so I'm going to call them by their actual real name. And the third, the weirdest of all, is Caribou. So it's really strange that Luffy doesn't remember all these people's names even when they correct him multiple times, but he's going to remember Caribou's name. It's a really, really, really odd one. Now, I don't want to say that that's like, oh yeah, Carrot, Bellamy, and Caribou for Straw Hat or anything, but I think it is interesting, and I think there might be a deeper meaning to it, or, like I said, it could just be because Carrot was a traveling companion, Bellamy's his friend, which is just outlier character. And, yeah, Caribou's just a weird one all around. It's so strange that, again, out of calling Brule Branch so many times, calling Peckham's Peckhamamushi so many times, that we would get a real, actual Luffy remembering Caribou's name. It's so strange. So yeah, next one, theory that I just think is fun that I saw, don't necessarily think it's true, is that CP0 are Big Mom's siblings, and I think I actually have a panel I can bring up for this. Okay, I was able to find an image, kind of covering my face here a little bit. But yeah, bringing up that this guy's mask is really similar to the one CP0 guy's mask, and this one long arm kid also shares the same like sort of outfit color scheme, but also seems like he could be this other guy here. So I think, honestly, that would be really, 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 let me shrink this down a little bit. Hopefully I can leave it up here for a little bit while I talk. Yeah, that would be really, really interesting to me, actually, because we know that Mother Caramel was working with the government, so the government could have always taken the kids. Maybe Big Mom didn't eat all of them. We know, kids die in flashbacks sometimes, but it's really rare that kids die in One Piece. So Mother Caramel could have been the only one actually eaten by Big Mom who took her devil fruit by cannibalizing her. But maybe the kids escaped, were taken by the government who were on their way there, and were made into the CP0 members. I think that would just be a really, really, really interesting twist. I think that would be really, really cool. So I'm kind of hoping for it. I kind of doubt it. But instead of them just being random nobodies, if they were related to Big Mom, that would be really, really cool. Another thing to talk about, as far as that goes, is that it would be a little bit plot holey in the case that I'm like, okay, so if they took these random kids and turned them into CP0 agents, why would they not take Lin Lin? Maybe they couldn't take Lin Lin, maybe there's a reason for it. But they did give her a bounty, so maybe because of this incident is why they gave her a bounty as a child. Or it could be for something else that I'm forgetting. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's a theory that I randomly saw that I was like, okay, I want to highlight this because I think it would be really neat. And honestly, it isn't like even as plot holy as the existence of Impel Down. So I mean, like with Impel Down, it was another thing like that I just kind of noticed or had it brought up recently that it's like, why would the world government keep devil fruit users in prison? Why would they not just execute the devil fruit user and then take their devil fruit to be given to a marine or a government agent? So it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't make sense. So again, them taking the kids but not taking Lin Lin wouldn't be all that plot holy. But yeah, next thing up is the theory that Momonosuke might look like Kaido. And I actually really like that because people have been talking for a while about why is Momo's devil fruit a failure? Momonosuke can turn into a dragon perfectly fine, it seems like. He can fly, he can create flame clouds, basically do everything that a dragon is supposed to do. So how on earth do you call Momonosuke's devil fruit a failure? Is it because it's pink and not blue? Is that the only thing that makes it a failure? Like, it seems like it's super OP. Basically the exact same thing that Kaido's got going on. So one failure that I saw brought up could be that we know the devil fruit was made using Kaido's lineage factor, his DNA. Could the consumption of his lineage factor have made Momonosuke grow up to look like Kaido? And that's why Shinobu is crying. It's not because, oh, I haven't seen Odin in so long and you look just like Odin. No, it's because, oh my god, he grew up and he looks like Kaido. I think that would be such an insane twist. I personally think that would be amazing. I love the idea of that. So yeah, just because of how wild and awesome a twist it would be. Then yeah, the next thing to bring up, and I actually have some panels for this too, is an idea that I had a while ago that I haven't seen other people talk about, and it's a discussion on the common ancestors in One Piece and how that could be important. So we know a lot of people lately, I think from another One Piece YouTuber, I don't really watch other One Piece YouTube content, so I don't know, but there's been a lot of people lately talking about the Enel sort of cover story, that cover arc, for some reason, and it's made me want to talk about something from it. So we know that from that, the Skypians, the Birkins, and the Shandians all came from a common ancestor who traveled to Earth from the moon. And this common ancestor could possibly be the Lunarians, because I mean, the people on the moons, or the people on the moon considered themselves gods or whatever, they would come and act like gods on the Red Line as Lunarians, and then as they sort of split up and got bred down over hundreds of years into the Shandians and the Skypians and the Birkins, they would lose their ability to control or conjure fire or whatever. So yeah, this Lunarians means from the moon. So yeah, I think the Lunarians could be this common ancestor, because we've seen, again, Lunarians with the wings like King has. I think that could be the common ancestor, so it makes me think what other things could be common ancestors, and a lot of things make sense. We see the ancient giants look like Oni, but then Kaido brings up that Kaido and Yamato might actually be from an actual race of Oni. So is it possible that the ancient giants are the ancestors of both the giants and the Oni, that over years, as the ancient giants were going extinct, the last one we knew of other than Little Oars Jr. was Oars 500 years in the past, as they were going extinct, they sort of bred down into the regular giants and into the Oni. And the last one I wanted to bring up, because of this cover arc, and because I think there's actually like a lot of evidence for that, I think, is this the image I need to bring up? Yeah, is the space pirates that Enel meets on the moon. So, the space pirates are animal-like humanoids, just like the minks are. We know that the minks have a connection to the moon. We know that the minks, yeah, sorry, losing my train of thought here. So yeah, the minks have a connection to the moon. The space pirates were on the moon. They're both animal-like humanoids. So I feel like either the minks could be descended from space pirates who went to Earth, or the minks and the space pirates could just both come from a common ancestor. Another thing to notice is that, again, this next point might mean nothing at all, but all of the outfits that the space pirates use have these gauges on them. But then when we see the technology that Lindbergh creates, the technology he makes all have these gauges on them. And it could just be because it's technology, it's steampunk-ish, it's very steampunk inspired when it comes to Lindbergh, but maybe it could be a similar thing where Lindbergh is using sort of the space pirate technology as a basis for what he does, in the same way that Frankie uses Vegapunk stuff as a basis for what his post-time skip stuff is like. So, yeah, another thing that I thought was interesting was the idea that common ancestors could be an important thing potentially in the world and lore of One Piece. So the last thing to bring up is to talk about Wano, the pros and cons, mostly my criticisms of it, but I don't want to just criticize without giving Wano its due as an arc. I think that Wano has some of the best arc characters in the series. Tama's an amazing arc character, Hyogoro is an amazing arc character, Shinobu is infinitely hilarious. I find Shinobu funny like every time. And most of the Scabbards are really good arc characters. Now that said, I think we probably could have done with less of them. The Scabbard cast is a little bit bloated. We introduced a lot of them and then didn't really do anything with the characters. So I'm like, did we really need Ashura Doji to exist? Did we really need Denjiro to exist? Did we really, I love Kawamatsu, but did we really need Kawamatsu to exist? I feel like if you write them out and give their parts to other characters, then you don't really need that many Scabbards in the story. So, maybe a little bit much there. Also, there's some really solid hype for the series, a lot of exciting things going on, and really, really great character designs for new characters who were introduced, and really great artwork. Like, I think the Toby Roppo have some of my favorite designs in the entire series. It's a shame that they weren't that used within the story, but they had great designs. The artwork's been great for Wano too. But my cons, my criticisms, when it comes to Wano as an arc, it's been real sloppy. I think even previous One Piece arcs, like a lot of people complain about Dressrosa. Dressrosa's only real problem was that you could tell that Oda was dragging out the pacing because he desperately wanted to hit that 100 chapter arc. And that was something that early on in Dressrosa, everybody was like, oh yeah, Oda wants to do a 100 chapter arc. And you could tell towards the end that, like, the story was wrapping up pretty quickly, like a good 15-20 chapters beforehand, and Oda really had to stretch to make the remainder of Dressrosa's content fit out to be 100 chapters. But other than that, like, it was stretched out, but the content itself was still very, very good. There was no sloppy writing or anything necessarily, it was just paced kind of poorly. But Wano has been pretty sloppy in a lot of ways. Acts 1 and 2 were really, really long for how little happens. Like, Acts 1 and 2 were a good, 60 to 80 chapters, I think. They're really long. But then, not that much happens in Acts 1 and 2. Like, not for the amount of time it is compared to other arcs that are that same amount of time or less. Not that much happens in Wano Acts 1 and 2. And a lot of what happens doesn't really turn out to be all that important. Plus, there's a lot of stuff. One of my big complaints reading week to week with Wano X 1 and 2 is I kept forgetting what was going on because we never saw anything or stuck with anything. We'd be like, okay, now we'll see Nami saying, okay, we're going to infiltrate this place. Next chapter, we'll have somebody else saying, we're going to do this. Next, we'll jump back to Nami, and they'll have already infiltrated, and they're like, oh yeah, that went this way. And basically, for as long as the story was, a good chunk of everything was happening off screen. We weren't even getting to see it on screen. Every chapter was just checking in with characters and having them tell us what happened off screen, which was a big problem. And even when we got into something good, something exciting, like the stuff with Zoro going on, the stuff with Luffy in the prison, and I'm like, okay, I'm invested in this part of the storyline, we wouldn't get to see that every week. It'd be like, we'll check in, then go somewhere else. Then we'll check in a couple chapters, go somewhere else. So it's not so bad marathoning, but when you're reading week to week, it's like, I'm only going to see this thing I care about like maybe once a month, and then we're just going to jump around to people saying what happened off screen and more Scabbard flashbacks. So I did have some problems with Acts 1 and 2. Then the Onigashima raid started, and it was such a breath of fresh air. The early Onigashima raid was so, so good. Another thing is, in hindsight, another criticism I have down here, is that we really could have developed Kid and the other characters more. Again, at this point, Wano has been so much longer even than Dressrosa, by a good dozen, 2 dozen chapters so far, and more on the way. Yet, look how developed Law was during Dressrosa. Look how developed all these other characters were. Like, look at Rebecca and Kairos, how insanely well developed they were. I know a lot of people found Rebecca annoying, but her story was really well written. So when I look at that, I'm like, I don't know. I feel as though Kid could have been developed a lot more. Maybe that development's coming in a later arc, but I feel like we just could have done a lot more in Wano since we spent so much time there. I just feel myself looking back on Acts 1 and 2 and being like, wow, we spent a lot of time there, and we really didn't learn or do that much outside of the Odin flashbacks, which were nice and all, but again, I'm not sure we necessarily needed them. And that brings me into my next big criticism, is that we learn everybody in Wano's damn genealogy, their backstory, every single thing about them. And while I like that, the completionist in me that's like, oh, I want to learn about every character likes that. When I compare that to previous arcs, I'm like, maybe it was too bloated. Maybe we didn't need every single Scabbard's backstory, considering that, imagine if Oda did that for Alabasta. Alabasta would be like 200 chapters. Imagine if we learned Chaka's life story, Koza's life story. Do you really want to know what Chaka ate for breakfast this morning? Or if we went through all the CP9 members in Eniya's lobby and learned their entire life stories. We didn't do that, and yet I still think they're more memorable and fun characters than a lot of the characters in Wano that we spent just so much time with, and that time really didn't endear me to them anymore. Like, I guess time doesn't necessarily equal quality. But yeah, I don't think we needed everybody's story in the way that we got it. Another issue, and that's something that like everybody's been complaining about, is everything being off-screened or just skimmed over after having dozens of chapters of build-up. And I've seen a ton of people, I guess, make excuses for this, saying, well, it's because Oda's just giving the bullet points and then the anime's going to flesh it out. Do you want to read a manga like that? Do you want to read a manga where we're just getting the bullet points, but oh, the anime will flesh it out later? The thing is, we got the development, the build-up for it. We got dozens of chapters. Again, Acts 1 and 2, and the early raid. We got dozens of chapters of build-up for stuff, and then had it skimmed over in the end and have it, like, off-screened. And to me, it's like, I would rather see the event happen. I would rather see the good hype stuff happen on screen and shorten the build-up a bit than to build it up for forever and then not give us the thing that we have built up to. And that's been a huge problem. And I think Yamato has added to that problem by spending dozens of chapters building up the Scabbards, building up these art characters in Wano, and then the Onigashima raid comes, and Oda's just like, oh yeah, all those characters we just wasted dozens of chapters building up, wasted like 2 years on, forget about them, Yamato's doing everything. And it's like, come on, like, I don't want to dislike Yamato, but at the same time, I'm just like, why throw all these characters to the background that hard? Or if you're going to throw them to the background that hard, I don't care. Like, throw these characters to the background. I don't need to see Ashura Doji compared to Yamato. Throw him to the background and give Yamato that development. But don't waste 2 years of my life for build up to these characters if these characters aren't going to go anywhere. So that's my problem, is that the build up does not match how things have been off-screened and skimmed over. If you're going to off-screen and skim stuff over, do that for the build-up, and then give us the good stuff on screen. Don't spend forever building things up, and then off-screen and skim over the actual good stuff that has been building to. And the next issue to bring up, the next criticism, is honestly the fact that Yamato was not even hinted at until the Onigashima raid. And I think I have a lot of problems with Yamato's writing as a character, but I think that one thing could totally change my opinion, is if we had got hints throughout Acts 1 and 2, just somebody mentioning every once in a while, oh, Kaido's child, the child of Kaido, the son of Kaido, then throughout Acts 1 and 2, we could have been like, oh my god, Kaido has a son. Is Kaido's son going to be like a really big, strong fighter? Is that another really strong enemy that we're going to have to deal with? We could have had so many discussions thinking about, oh, what's going to happen? And then when Yamato shows up and Yamato's actually a good guy, actually an ally to Luffy, that's a twist. But instead, we say, oh wow, Kaido has a son, and then immediately throw Yamato in and say, oh yeah, I'm Luffy's friend, I'm his ally. So it's like, okay, that's not a twist then, because this character came out of nowhere, had no build-up, had no development. And I said it when Yamato confronted Kaido on the rooftop, I'm like, imagine those dozens of chapters, if we had spent some time building up Yamato, then Yamato confronting her father could have been this really big emotional moment of finally standing up to this abusive father. But instead it's like, we don't know Yamato. At the time, Yamato had no development at all. Yamato was thrown into the story out of nowhere, like, oh, look at me, I have a mythical Zoan devil fruit. I can stand up to the strongest character so far that's been hyped up for forever. I can do all this stuff. I'm immediately friends with Luffy with no build up to switching sides or anything. And it's just like out of nowhere, no build up. And Yamato, I've said for a while, would be the most hated character in One Piece. Imagine if Yamato looked like Weevil. Imagine if we got a character introduced, son of Kaido, stands up to Kaido, mythical devil fruit, conqueror's haki, all this shit, but they looked like Weevil. Like, people would be just seething and steaming every single week. And that's just because Yamato's not a well-written character. If you were to ask me what is my idea of like a mid-2000s DeviantArt Mary Sue character, I would have been like, I'm half angel, half demon, and everybody hated me and I was abused and depressed as a child, but now everybody loves me because I'm so strong and beautiful, and I have all these powers and two-toned hair and heterochromia, and Yamato, and I'm a wolf princess, and Yamato fits every single one of those boxes except for the heterochromia and the half angel part. Yamato is the most mid-2000s Mary Sue character that I can possibly think of, and takes attention and screen time and relevance away from these characters that we spent dozens of chapters building up in Wano. And I wouldn't have that problem if we had spent a little bit, just a little bit of time building up or hinting at Yamato. Or if we had spent less time on these characters that didn't mean anything. If Yamato is going to mean something, spend some time developing the character that means something, because Yamato came in and I was so excited at first. And I was like, okay, this seems like an out-of-nowhere ass-pull Mary Sue character, but I bet Yamato's going to get so much development. And then 40 chapters passed. And we talk about other characters getting off-screened. Yamato was off-screen for most of the first 40 chapters that Yamato was around. Yamato had no development for like a year after introduction. And then we finally get a flashback. We finally get this Yamato development we've all been waiting for. And Yamato's backstory is essentially a rerun of Tama's, except being Kaido's daughter. That's the only difference. It's essentially a rerun of Tama's backstory. Tama's relationship with Ace felt so much more natural and real and wholesome. And the thing is, again, if we hadn't had Tama in Wano, I'd be like, okay, this is unique, this is different. But I'm like, I just saw this flashback. I just saw this backstory. Tama just did this. So Yamato is just less good but stronger Tama. So again, I have so many issues with Yamato being thrown in the story and then not developed. Another issue is the Beast Pirates just not putting up a threat like at all. It felt like in Whole Cake there was a sense of danger, but in Wano there just isn't that. Like the Straw Hats have kicked their asses. Like it feels like we didn't even need all this build up in Wano. We could have just came in and wiped the floor with these guys. Compared to other arc villain groups, like compared to the Doflamingo family, CP9, the Baroque works, compare those characters to Kaido's crew, and except for like Queen, none of Kaido's crew has been developed as much. We know next to nothing about all of Kaido's crew members. Like they just came in, got their asses kicked, and that was it. That was all their story. And they barely put up more of a fight. They put up just a teeny bit more of a fight than Hody's Job Squad. So again, there has been an issue with how easy, how simple it's been. Oops, dropped my mouse. Sorry about that. Everything still looked good. How easy, how simple it has been for the Straw Hats to just win here. Like, it seems like we need the Big Mom Pirates to come in for there to be a challenge. We need these government ships to get here for there to be a challenge, because Kaido's crew are a bunch of jobbers. Another issue, since I brought up Yamato being given so much development, and then not being given so much development, being given so much importance without being developed, I feel like people are going to be like, oh, you have a Carrot figure, you're a fan of Carrot. I am, but that's not why I don't like Yamato. I view Carrot and her story and Yamato and her story as two totally very different things. And I think Carrot was well written up until getting off-screened by Parasparrow. Up before that, her story made a lot of sense. But then getting off-screen by Parasparrow and then doing nothing for dozens of chapters, that doesn't make sense for the story that was being told beforehand. And it's not really even just Carrot. It's most of the Scabbards, it's most of the characters in general. They've just been off-screened and forgotten about and skimmed over. I mean, people talk about Jack not even getting to ever use a named attack. People talk about, oh gosh, Drake and Apu have been perma off-screened. I don't think they're coming back. We're never seeing them again. Hawkins and Killer. I feel like we have seen less Hawkins and Killer than we've seen Fukurokuju versus Raizo. Like, what happened to those characters? I'm not as mad about not seeing the Big Mom fight with Kid and Law because, again, I think Big Mom's just going to escape or whatever. So I'm not really as, irked about that. But it does bum me just how much has been off-screened and made irrelevant that we spent so long leading up to for it to get that way, compared to Yamato, who's just been shoved down our throats and just didn't have any build-up or development. That issue's frustrating. Another thing with the King and Parasparrow, or not King and Parasparrow, Jack and Parasparrow getting taken out by Inu and Neko. I saw a lot of people complain about that. I've never thought it was bad because it fits that Inu was the leader of this country, takes out Jack. It fits that the people who did damage to Parasparrow were first Wanda and Carrot, then Sanji, then Nekomamushi, all people who had a connection to Pedro. That makes sense. But I mentioned before when it happened that the only issue I have is that now if Carrot and Nekomamushi don't carry on in the story, it's like, well, what's the point? The feat of taking down that character could have gone to a character like Brook that it could benefit further into the story, but now he's down, and if Nekomamushi and Carrot don't continue on in the story, it doesn't really benefit anyone continuing on. And especially Jack, who is one of the three sort of big, all-stars of the Beast Pirates. If Jack was taken down by, again, he gets tired fighting everyone else. Usopp hits the final hit on him. Everybody's like, "Oh yeah, Usopp, you're the best. You took down a guy with a billion bounty." That would at least progress a character into the future. Or if people brought up Yamato taking down Jack before that fight got decided, and again, it could have been a feat if Yamato continues on in the story to carry on with Yamato. But again, if Inuarashi doesn't continue on in the story, and I do not see Inu for Straw Hat happening, then it's like that fight didn't end up, like the feat of taking down Jack doesn't end up benefiting anybody further into the story. It's just like, okay, that's it. It ends here. Doesn't benefit anyone. Doesn't matter any further into the story than now. Which isn't necessarily bad, it's just that it could have been better. And yeah, another thing I wanted to bring up, I think right now before I end, I know my thoughts are swirling around, so there's probably a bunch of stuff I'm forgetting, but maybe I can talk about it later. We can talk about it in the comments or on Twitter or anywhere else. Is that I think there's a difference, because despite all the crap I talked about, how Yamato has been a massive detriment to the arc and to the story as a whole, I still kind of like Yamato. Like, how am I not going to like this Marisu character who has all these good things? I try my best to like Yamato, and I think there's a difference, and I've brought this up with series before, and I think it can be true of characters, where there are series where I'm like, this series isn't that well written, but it's fun, and I like it, and I'm like, okay, this series is really well written, I can tell, but it's boring and I don't care. I think it can be true of characters. I think that Yamato is probably the least well written character that's ever existed in One Piece. You're supposed to find Treble annoying. That's a successful character to me. You're supposed to hate Spandam. That's a successful character to me. But Yamato is a character that I just think is poorly written. The most poorly written ever in One Piece. Because usually there just aren't poorly written characters. But I kind of like Yamato, even though here's the thing, I like Yamato, I think Yamato's extremely poorly written, the story's not over, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done for the character. And on the other side of things, to give another example, is Momonosuke. Momonosuke is a character that I think the development from the first time we saw Momo to things that he said coming into play and developing and changing little by little over the course of a few hundred chapters, Momonosuke is a very well written character, a very well built up character to be the future shogun of Wano. But I find Momonosuke kind of annoying. I don't really like him. So again, that's the opposite. Yamato is a character I kind of like, but has been a huge detriment to the story. Really not well written. Momonosuke is a character that's really well written. Don't really like him very much. So there are opposites there. But yeah, that's it. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for criticizing Yamato whatsoever, because Yamato is the new Bartolomeo. But yeah, I say wait another 200 chapters and see what happens in the end. So I guess we'll have to see. That was my big discussion for this week, since it's a break week. Thank you so much for watching. Again, there's probably tons I forgot, so I'll save up those ideas for next time we come around. Like if you did like the video, comment down there to tell me what you thought of all these thoughts and whatever your thoughts and all that. Subscribe if you want. If you want a link to the Discord server, asking, I'll give you one. It's free and open for anyone. And if you'd like to talk more on Twitter, follow me there. If you would like to help support the channel to help me keep making videos via supporting on Patreon, it's patreon.com/HakuOfTheTubes, or a link will be in the description. But either way, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.